Hello, so what's up guys? Today I'll be going through all the tools and programming environment which I use on day-to-day basis. I'll also be explaining the reasons why and how I started using those workflows and the pipelines. So let's get started. So first thing is the OS. So right now I'm using Windows as you guys can see, but I started my development on a Linux machine. So what happened is my initial machine didn't have that much compute to use Windows, to have a full-fledged Windows, and on top of it have VSCODE and all the other tools running. So what I did, I actually in my initial days I ditched Windows and I started with Linux, and that was a very good decision because Linux for developers is very friendly. It feels very natural, and once you start using all the commands and all, it becomes very easy to use. And as compared to Windows, there's a lot of configurations. It's a lot here and there which you have to do in order to do that. But now actually, like since I think last 1 year now, I'm using my Windows environment because I upgraded my machine. And when I upgraded my machine, this machine actually came in-house with Windows installed. So I was like, okay, let's see now what we can do with Windows. So but now Windows has come a long way for the whole development environment, and I'm using it for last 1 year and I have faced no issues. It's actually a better experience than Linux now, because in my Linux I used to face some driver issues, some inconsistencies here and there, but in Windows it's too stable as compared to Linux. And because it's also one reason, because I was using Arch Linux, which was very prone to break here and there. But when it comes to Windows, the benefit is the consistency. All the softwares now can easily work. But if you try to use same softwares in Linux, there are a lot of issues with GPU. You have to add a GPU drivers, etc., etc. It's a lot of mess. So now, since last 1 year, like I said, I'm using Windows, and it has been working perfectly for my day-to-day needs. So the first thing which I did is install a terminal. Now with latest Windows, what you can do is you can install a WSL, which is kind of a subsystem for Linux, so that you can kind of run a whole Linux kernel on top of your Windows or parallel to Windows, like how in older days we used to use VirtualBox to create a whole Ubuntu on top of Windows. So it's similar thing but better. So what it gives is, it gives a whole fun terminal which you can use for all the Linux based command, and it works completely fine like how a Linux will work. If I show you here, as you can see, I have installed Ubuntu on top of this terminal, and this gives me all the commands and everything which I can use, which I can do over a Linux machine. And also the benefit is it's actually connected to Windows, so I can kind of use all the Windows application alongside the terminal. So I can call things from here and it can access everything, and everything seems to be more integrated. I can access all the Windows drive from my Linux thing. Earlier, if the general pattern is people do dual boot, so they start Windows and then they start Linux as a separate environment. The problem is then you have to kind of mount a Windows drive to a Linux, but you cannot do vice versa, or you can do it with a lot of different formats, etc. Instead, if you use a terminal, it becomes more easy, and it is far way better experience in my case, because the one thing which I used to use in Linux is a terminal. Apart from that, the UI for Linux is still a UI, so I used to not use that. I used to not use it that much, so it was more on the terminal which I used to use. So that one thing comes here handy, and you can just use Windows completely like Windows, and whenever you need a Linux touch, you can open terminal and you can use that. So it's a good tool. Okay, so now we have a Linux terminal, but now I'll go into what all Linux tools I have kind of ported here to use. The first is a text editor. So again, it backs to the time when I used to use Linux. So what used to happen is my machine used to, if I used to start like 3-4 VS Code client, it used with alongside Chrome, it used to become too heavy. So what I did is I started using a terminal based text editor. So I started with Nano. So Nano is just a normal text editor which you can use and do that. But slowly I started, I started getting bored of it because it's tough to use it, and it's not that handy when you actually have to do a development of a folder. So when we are talking about a whole folder, a whole code base, you cannot do it with Nano. So I started using Vim, and with Vim, it was tough in the beginning because even to quit Vim, there are commands. There is no mouse control at all, and it's all purely commands and just the words. So it was more like what to do, where to do. But slowly I started using the commands of Vim. I saw them and then I tried using them, and then I think in 1 month or 2 months, it is the best thing which you can do if you want to go into development, serious development. Vim is something, if you know, it's super fast. Your development time is increased by at least, in my case, 2 to 3x because of the commands. Like if you want to go to last, you can just directly write G. Whereas even in the browser based or even in the view based GUI based thing, you have to use your mouse, like scroll like this. If it's like 1000 line of code, you have to scroll like this, or you have to put it like this. Here you can just write G, capital G, to go up and down. You can write some line number to directly go to that line. You can kind of search if you want to search something. All those things are there. So what I did, I started using Vim, and then during my development phase, I started installing things like linters, prettifiers, and all the lines, and like a different package. Like here I have given like a VS Code, how you have a file explorer. I have tried to give a similar thing here. So what I did with time, I kind of created a config file now, which I usually use, the dot files. So this is the first thing which I always install whenever I use a Linux machine, a Vim or a terminal based text editor. The next thing which I do in any Linux machine, so because it's a Linux terminal, is have a file browser which is again a terminal based. This again comes with the fact is that when I started using Linux, there was, like in Ubuntu you get a file explorer, but when you start using an Arch Linux, it's up to you if you want to install something or not. So what I had, there was a time when I wanted to keep my system as light as possible, so I used to not install anything. Okay, so it still holds true. I don't install anything if I can do without it. So same, so I didn't install any file browser. Instead I started looking for alternatives on a terminal. So I came across Ranger, and Ranger is, according to me, is better than a file explorer. Like there is no mouse requirement. You can always see what is inside, what was behind, rather than going back, forward, etc. And you can just from here only go through everything. So combining this with a text editor, like I said, like if I want to open a file, I can just do this. It will open this. If I close this, I go back to the Ranger. So this thing actually helps a lot. And this is one tool which is, again, because I come from a Linux background, so this is the tool which I always have. So these two are actually very helpful when it comes to all the Linux requirement which I have, and these two are more than enough for all the things which I do with the terminal. Apart from that, I used to not use a lot of other tools, like of course like SSH client, etc. Those things are already installed, so you have to not worry about that. But the major thing which I used to use are these two tools. Okay, so now we have covered the terminal thing, but now anyone can say, why Windows? You can have a Linux machine working with this. One reason, like I said, consistency, but the remaining thing is, as soon as I got a machine which was capable to run like not 10 but at least 4-5 VS Code terminals, VS Code client along with the browser, I started using VS Code like any other normal developer. So I started using VS Code, but here also I have kind of done few things in order to boost my workflow. So like as I said, I am very much habitual with Vim and terminal based text editor. So I used to, when I started using VS Code, it was still tough for me to like click here or start with it. So what I did, I kind of found an extension which can convert your VS Code and use Vim inside that VS Code. So, and with that, I just started using Vim in VS Code, which is like best of both worlds. You can have all the view based thing which you need, and all the Vim commands. Like if I go and I go here, I search something, everything works like how it works in Vim, but it's inside of VS Code, which is like best. So now I don't even use controllers. I use :W to save something, which makes it even easier to do anything in VS Code. Okay, so apart from Vim, the other things which I use are mostly some extensions which over the years I have kind of become habitual of using. One of them is Mermaid. So this Mermaid extension comes handy whenever I'm kind of trying to brainstorm on some project, or I'm trying to explain some algorithm to someone, or let's say I'm just writing a pure project documentation. So this is a very handy tool. Without any other softwares, you can directly create some algorithms. So let's say if I want to have, something like B to C, I can just have it over text. So the best thing is, it's because it's all text based, you can do whatever you want to do. There are a lot of other ways in which you can create graphs, create things, create workflows, activity diagrams. A lot of diagrams are supported by it, and the best part is it also have a browser extension. So if you push it as, let's say, a markdown to GitHub, in your browser it will always render a graph in place of it. Also, it also comes with a GitHub workflow. There are a lot of GitHub actions which you can kind of use, so that when you push the Mermaid code, it will kind of convert it into a diagram. So both of these things become very, like it allows you to write seamless graphs and so explain the algorithm better without putting a lot of efforts. This is one thing which I usually like, and I have become kind of very habitual to it. Okay, so the last thing which I usually use during my whole development is the debugger, and debugger was actually also a main reason for me to start using VS Code, because the debugger of it is very powerful. You can kind of develop and debug code very easily with that. So the last thing which I use in my VS Code is a debugger. So the whole workflow of mine is spread in a way that if I want to have a quick code up session, or if I want to just write some raw code, I just use Ranger and Vim. So this Ranger plus Vim is kind of like VS Code substitute. So that provides your browser and the text. If I want to quickly write something, I'll write here. If I want to actually have a 3 hours, 4 hours of coding session, or like a big project, I'll start with VS Code, and that I'll use. So it's like that how my whole development journey works and how I code day to day. Okay, yeah, so that's it. That's all about my coding environment and all the tools which I use. So thanks for watching. Do let me know if you like these tools, or if you have any other suggestions for other tools which I can actually go through and try with. And anyways, subscribe, like, and let me know how you feel about the video in the comment section.